how do we identify what we should increase the price point to, and how do we actually do that? So it's really a 3-step process. The first thing you want to do is you want to figure out your close rates for qualified calls. Now, I say for qualified calls because what a lot of people will do, I'll just put Q calls. What a lot of people will do is they'll say, okay, my close rate right now is 10%. But the problem is that you have no real lead scoring system in place. You're literally getting on a call with anybody, even if they're a homeless person down the street. And so you're judging what your price point should be out of the most unqualified people possible. So instead, we want to say, of the qualified people, of the people that could afford to pay for my services, what is the close rate here? And a lot of times it's probably better than what you think. But we need to isolate that variable because, like anything else, we're not going to just immediately double our price point and say, okay, that's it. We want to run a test and see if it beats out our own price point. So the first thing you do is you identify your close rate on qualified calls. The second thing that you can do is you want to say, okay, you could try to increase your price point by 30%, by 50%, by 80%, but why not just double it? Because in all reality, let's say you charge something for $1,000 right now. Charging $2,000, whoever can afford $1,000, they can afford $2,000. If you're charging $4,000, whoever can afford $4,000, they can afford $8,000. And I know some people are going to say, oh, no, they can't, blah, blah, blah. In all reality, most of the times they can. If they're qualified, if it makes sense, they can find that kind of money. And if you can find anybody in your marketplace that's charging that amount of money, then there's no reason why you can't charge that amount of money as well. So I just say you're straight ahead and double it. Now, when you're doubling it, whenever you're taking the calls, there's really 2 routes that you can take. You can either do 50-50 or you can do 100%. And what I mean by this is that you can either start trying to pitch 50-50, meaning that on 50% of your calls, you double your price point. On 50% of the calls, you don't. That's typically the safest route because if you know that, let's say the $2,000 price point is working really well right now, then you don't want to lose the money. Then maybe you keep half your calls at $2,000 on a price drop and half your calls at $4,000 on a price drop. Now, the problem with that is that it gets a little bit confusing at scale. As you're doing follow-up calls, et cetera, you don't know who you pitched $2,000 at, who you pitched $4,000 at, and it can get a little confusing, which is why I'm more of a fan of the 100%. Now, there's a little bit of risk involved in this, meaning that if it totally flops, you could make absolutely no money. But like I said, I very rarely ever see it totally flop. Most of the time, it comes out okay. And so you do 100%. You say, okay, from this day forward, it's going to be $4,000 and I'm not going to offer anybody for $2,000. And what I typically like to see is I like to run this for about 14 taken calls. So that gives me a really, really good kind of test. Not 14 booked calls, but 14 calls where the person was qualified. Remember, they're qualified and you make the price drop. If you can't get 1 close out of 14 calls, then maybe the price is too high, right? But if you do get 1 and it shows some promising signs, then maybe it's something we dive a little bit deeper into. And so let me give you the formula that I use for my clients or even for my portfolio companies when I'm trying to scale. And I wrote it down here so I don't forget. So it's C2 equals P1 times C1 divided by P2. So let me explain what these numbers mean. In short, this is a formula that allows you to calculate if this new price point is just as good or even better as your old price point. Because remember, we don't just want to say, oh, my close rate lowered, this is worse. Because if your close rate lowered slightly, but you're doubling the profit per client, you could still come out ahead. So what you need to do before you go into this is you need to remove emotions from it. And you need to pretty much be like, what is the bottom close rate that I can accept that this new price point is worth doing? Because all things being equal, even if you were making the same amount of money per lead or per call in this new close rate, then that's okay if your close rate drops because you're working with less clients. So just for easy numbers here, let's say that your close rate cuts in half, but you're able to maintain the same amount of money that you were making before because you doubled the price point. Well, that's okay because now you're having to do less work for clients in the back end. So you're making the same amount of money, you're just doing less work. So ultimately your dollar per hour has increased. I hope that makes sense. So don't be so afraid of your close rate dropping. You need to know exactly what the bottom close rate that you're willing to accept in order to keep on running this test. So let me give you these numbers here. So P1 is your original price. C1 is your original qualified close rate on sales calls here. and P2 is the new price. So essentially, you multiply your current price times your current close rates, and then you divide that by the new price to figure out what your baseline close rate needs to be in order to essentially have both scenarios be equal. But remember, that's okay because you're doing less work on the back end. So let me kind of drive this home with an illustration here. So let's say that your previous price point was $1,000. And let's say that your previous close rate was, let's say 30%. And let me actually make sure I pull up my calculator here so that I don't mess up these numbers. So $1,000 and 30%. And then we're going to divide this by the new price point, which we want to double our price point. So we'll say it's $2,000. Okay. So essentially this number comes out to, if you do the math, 15%. Okay. So if you did 1,000 times 30% divided by $2,000, you get about 15%. Not about, you get exactly 15%. So what that means is when you test this new $2,000 price point, you should be willing to accept a 15% close rate, okay? And I know a lot of people are going to watch this that are good at math and say, well, aren't you just willing to accept half what your old close rate is? The answer to that is yes, but you should still be able to do this formula so that you can play around, because a lot of times your close rate won't be 15%. It might be 20% or 25%. And so you should be able to figure out how much more money you're making with the same amount of leads by increasing your price point. But in short, if you want to make it simple, take your current close rate, divide it by, put it in half, and if you double your prices, that's the bottom close rate that you'll be able to take. So if I was going to run this for 100%, for the next 14 sales calls, I would be looking for at least a 15% close rate for me to say, this makes sense, let me keep on doing this.
If you want my help installing any of these systems in your business done for you, be sure to book a call with my team down below.